The Refugees is a collection of short stories about Vietnamese refugees and the people they meet in the United States. It's also about the people in Vietnam as well, when the refugees return to Vietnam. And of course, it's a book that comes out of my own experiences as being a Vietnamese refugee to the United States in 1975. But it's mostly not about me. It's about the stories that I encountered growing up and the people that I met. And the sense that I had that these refugees were haunted by their past. They were haunted by the country that they had lost and the people that they had lost and everything that they had lost. And so the themes of the book are very much about haunting and loss and absence and the struggle to make new lives in the United States, but also what it means to remember a lost country and eventually to return to the lost country as well. And ultimately, it's a book about how we all share, to one degree or another, this experience of displacement and loss and fleeing from something that oftentimes we don't understand, and our desire is to build new lives. When I was growing up in the United States in the 1970s and 1980s, I grew up in a Vietnamese refugee community. And I heard stories about our past and about Vietnam and all the struggles that people had been through all the time. And yet I knew that as an American, the rest of my country, the rest of the United States, knew nothing about Vietnam or the Vietnam War or the Vietnamese people, except in terms of what those things meant for Americans. And so there was this desire in me to talk about these Vietnamese refugee experiences, these Vietnamese stories, because I knew that most Americans knew nothing about these stories. And I also knew that how Americans saw Vietnam was how the world would see Vietnam, because Americans could get their stories out there around the world and the Vietnamese people could not. So that was where the urgency came from in writing about Vietnamese experiences. And so the themes of the book are, again, very much about what it means to be Vietnamese, what it means to be a refugee, what does it mean to be a Vietnamese trying to become an American. And all of these themes are things that I have struggled with constantly throughout my life. And I think that they are not unique to the Vietnamese refugees. They are common to all displaced people in the United States and in other countries. And so the experiences of the refugees of my book are also the experiences of refugees and immigrants all over the world. As a writer, I see myself as an American writer, as someone who grew up in the tradition of American literature and through that connected to the traditions of English language literature and European literature as well. So the short stories of the refugees are deeply influenced by this Anglo-American, European tradition of short fiction writing coming from people like James Joyce and Dubliners, for example. So these stories are very much a part of a tradition that uses the short story to explore human emotions and human tragedies and human dramas in looking at moments in people's lives that are defining moments. Right? The stories are not about people's entire lives, they're about one moment in their lives that reveals something to us about their character and what it is that they want and how it is that they can take action. And so I see this book very much as a part of this Western literary tradition of short fiction. I am an American writer. So the contemporary literature that I know is the American literary situation, and outside of that, what's happening in Europe and certain parts of Asia. But for me, the contemporary American situation is that contemporary American literature tends to be fairly apolitical. It is a literature that is very much focused on the interior lives of Americans and on America. And as someone who is a Vietnamese refugee who is also an American writer, I find this rather limiting. And so I'm interested in writing literature that connects America to the world and literature that is also political. And you see that very much in my novel, The Sympathizer, which is about the Vietnam War, but also about the United States, and is an intensely political novel. This book, The Refugees, is about Americans, but also about Vietnamese people. It's about how America has to confront the arrival of refugees in this country who have come because of American history in Vietnam. And so even by writing about refugees, I think I'm writing about both a human subject, but also a political subject as well, one that has deep meaning for the United States, but increasingly also obviously has deep meaning for Europeans as well.